following presentation is about transition as a process of fundamental change, affecting economy, society, and spatial development of a city. Often this process is driven by national and global impacts such as the current economic crisis or long-term changes of a country in its global economic competitiveness. Transition means change and brings the need to adapt to new conditions. This is a challenging process which nations, cities, and agglomerations have to face from time to time. Change and a successful transition require innovation in economics, politics, and culture. Being able to adapt to changing frame conditions needs innovative perspectives as well as new ways of acting. The basis of former wealth, such as experience and the regional economy, may interfere with thinking of new solutions and may restrain the process of successful transition. Cities of different cultural and economic backgrounds could give each other impulses for a new perspective, even if the comparison does not seem very obvious at first glance, which is the idea of the following presentation. The presentation contrasts Detroit with Zurich transition, two cities with a different path of development, economic and cultural background. Zurich is a European city that has experienced economic transition over the last decades and may face another in the near future. During the last 20 years, the city mainly experienced growth interrupted by economic crisis as the dot-com crisis. Detroit is an industrial city that represents the American way of life, especially when it comes to automobility. Could this comparison add a new perspective to the discussion on the transition of Detroit? The presentation will analyze the phenomenon of transition on the example of Zurich. The impact of influencing factors on the regional transformation process, such as national economic transition and changing political and market conditions, will be analyzed. First, asking for the most important drivers of the development, and second, identifying the shaping forces for the spatial transformation of the agglomeration. In this context, mobility will be considered as a key impact factor, according to the hypothesis that changes of mobility and mobility culture are main important drivers affecting the change of frame conditions as well as the regional transition itself. Which are the main drivers for transition? Switzerland has undergone a fundamental economic transition in the last decades. From 1960 to 2010, the share of employment in the manufacturing sector declined from almost 50 to 23%, while the service sector expanded from 39 to 73%. 10 percentage points of the increase of services as well as a decrease of manufacturing industry occurred in the last 20 years. As Zurich region is one of the main important economic centers of Switzerland, with almost 1 of 5 Swiss employees working here, the city stands as an example for the national economic transition. The chart shows the economic change in this period for Zurich region in 3 time steps since 1995. The bars represent the share of the main branches and the total growth of the employment in the whole agglomeration. The general trend of tertiarization is reflected by a decrease of traditional industries such as machine industry or metal manufacturing, and also construction lost jobs. Regional factors influenced the economic development of Zurich agglomeration in a characteristic way. Even though Zurich is a relatively small city in an international scale, it is an important financial center. Finance and business services are concentrated in the city. This explains why the service sector did not grow in all industries, but experienced an internal transition. Employment in transportation, trade or printing industry has partly been replaced by high-skilled service industry, such as business services, insurances, real estate and especially financial activities. Also, the ed and med sector increased with health services and education. During the 1990s, the IT sector boomed in connection with the emerging World Wide Web, a boom which was followed by the dot-com crisis around 2000, which is reflected by the contrary trends of computer and electronic industry. The growth of the Swiss economy was accompanied by population growth, here in green line, largely driven by immigration. Zurich, as one of the most important economic centers of Switzerland, benefited from this development. Due to its international competitiveness in the financial sector and location quality, regional economic growth led to increasing population with rates above the national average from 2000 onwards for the agglomeration of Zurich, while in the 19th, Zurich agglomeration was below average. National and regional drivers in combination influenced the transition of Zurich. The general Swiss trend of tertiarization, combined with the economic structure of Zurich, lead to an increase of finance industry. The need of high-skilled workers gave rise to immigration and rising incomes. The growth of the finance industry also gave impacts to others, such as business services and branches related to private consumption. Rising incomes were also linked to the financial sector and stimulated retail, real estate and construction industry in connection with the population growth due to immigration. Employment and population growth mainly occurred from 2000 onwards after receiving a setback during the dot-com crisis in the 19th. After the analysis of the main drivers, let's have a look at the shaping forces for spatial transformation. Transition is also a process affecting the structure and spatial development of a city and their agglomeration. Trends like urbanization, sub-, des-, peri-urbanization and re-urbanization are always reflecting changing economic and social conditions. Those trends become part of the transition problem if housing and infrastructure of a city are abandoned due to suburbanization, for example. The detailed look on the communities of the Zurich agglomeration shows a diverse picture from year to year. Starting with a clear trend of population loss, mainly in some suburban communities in the early 90s, from 1993 onwards also the city of Zurich experienced population decline until 1999, while suburban and peri-urban regions show a diverse pattern of growth and decrease. Aggregating the communities to the three categories center, including the city of Zurich, suburban and peri-urban areas, shows clearer trends of population development. In total, the population of Zurich agglomeration increased between 1990 and 2010, as shown before, while the city of Zurich was stagnating or even slightly declining until 2001, gaining population only after that year. Suburban and peri-urban communities showed an upward trend during the whole period. The dotted lines show the upward trends and also the city's late re-urbanization, which should not be overrated. The bars show the variance of the city population growth from the average of the agglomeration. The city's increase in population has on evidence been below average for the last 18 years, while suburban and especially peri-urban areas have been main locations for population growth. In total number, the city of Zurich grew by around 35,000 inhabitants from 2000 to 2010. The rest of the agglomeration received a growth of 106,000 people in the same time. Even rural areas, which are not shown on the chart, were growing above the average. Re-urbanization turned out to be a stagnation of the city in fact. One main important shaping force for the spatial distribution of population growth between 1990 and 2000 was public transportation, which plays a major role for mobility in Switzerland, connecting place of residence and place of work. Population growth in that time was highest where public transport has been improved. The chart shows population growth for different categories of communities relative to the Swiss average. The communities are grouped concerning their centrality into center at the back, agglomeration, peri-urban area, transitional area, and periphery. The horizontal axis shows the improvement of accessibility from the right hand to the left hand side. In this time, improvement of public transport was strongly correlated with an increase of population almost everywhere, in the center as well as in the peripheral areas. After the year 2000, the picture changes slightly. Indeed, a similar trend is still observable, but the level of accessibility seems to be more important. Center and agglomeration communities gain more population than the periphery. After 2000, not only the improvement of public transport seems to guide regional development, but the general level of centrality becomes more important. The role of accessibility as a shaping factor for the development changed during the two observed decades. While an improvement of transport infrastructure was a factor of regional growth before 2000, building lanes for development into the hinterland, after 2000, this trend has been modified by growing importance of the level of centrality. The same correlation applies to private transportation, with an even more accentuated growth of the periphery before 2000, where road infrastructure has been improved. To generalize the findings, one could say the spreading growth of the 90s, driven by transport improvement, has been replaced by a sub- and peri-urbanization concentrated only on areas with considerably gains of accessibility. Summarizing the results for the drivers for transition and the shaping forces for spatial transformation, one could say Zurich's economy had undergone a transition from industry to services, mainly based on high-skilled workforce and largely depending on the financial sector and related industries. Employment increased overall, but also had years of decrease. Rising income and immigration were main drivers in the last 10 years. The trends of sub- and peri-urbanization survived this transition. The city of Zurich stagnated or even lost population until 2000, and only after received growth, still below average of the whole agglomeration. Times of prosperity came with rising prices for real estate as the city became more attractive for office space, which may have interfered activating a new trend of re-urbanization. The need for mobility and the improvement of transport infrastructure and accessibility forced suburbanization. But the trend reflects also population pressure and high land prices near the city center, driven by investments of the real estate industry, which were also linked to the growth of the financial industry. Investors were searching for investment opportunities, and the growth of Swiss economy pushed the attractiveness of Swiss real estate as investment property. Centrality was valuated higher than before. The trend to own residential property and car ownership was linked to income. The income level increased mostly in peri-urban areas, followed by suburbia and the city center. Low tax rates of communities, especially in the suburban area, were attracting new inhabitants. For the peri-urban communities, the affordability of private residential buildings and site development may have been the most important drivers. Some of the drivers and shaping forces turned out to be key factors for the transition in the case of Zurich. The competitive specialization of the economy, income, population, and the role of mobility were shaping forces for peri- and suburbanization. They will be taken into account when comparing the transition of Zurich with Detroit and asking for Detroit's potential for transition. The image of Detroit is characterized by known trends as a declining car industry, loss of jobs and population, abandoned houses, and closed shops downtown, also due to suburbanization. The trend continues until today. The last census has been distinct and disturbing, showing a decline of population about 25% since 2000. But this is not what we are searching for when asking for potential for a successful transition process. This image of Detroit is a burden preventing to focus on location qualities and to attract investments. While searching for a future perspective, looking back is only helpful in terms of learning the lessons from the past, integrating them to identify potential for transition and building a future vision on this basis. Having a look on the role of mobility as a key factor for transition gives some insights. The Detroit car industry declined and lost jobs while the number of cars increased worldwide and in the US, a sign of failing to adapt to changing needs of mobility and market conditions. To some extent, this is still valid today. Of course, there are efforts for increasing sales, but without leaving the traditional path. Shortage of resources, rising oil prices, and stagnating incomes of broad levels of population don't seem to push neither for innovation of lighter fuel-saving cars nor for the development of new mobility concepts. On the individual level, automobility enabled the population to leave the city, abandon their houses and settle in the suburban area, buying houses and raising their families in a green environment. From the individual point of view, this has been a successful adaptation to the changing frame conditions. For both trends, mobility played a major role. Also, the results were devastating for Detroit, as the city has been left behind with abandoned infrastructure, high spending, the ones who could not move, and the image of a declining city. In a transformation process like this, there is a need to reframe the image of the city to build a vision for the future. Where are positive signs showing potential to support the transition of Detroit? Broadening the horizon beyond the city's constraints could give some hints for potential. Detroit City is massively shrinking. Detroit metropolitan area lost population as well since mid of the 1980s, even though not with the same dynamic as the city. Also, the metropolitan area also received some growth during the 90s. In the last couple of years, there was a setback. Compared to the US, the metropolitan region is indeed lagging behind, but at least sustaining the position. In times of such fundamental transition and transformation, one should not expect growth. The chart of income development of the metropolitan area of Detroit shows that the per capita personal income has been above average of the US until 5 years ago, when the national income growth passed the Detroit's metropolitan area. Also, the development of the last few years is unpleasant. The income development of the metropolitan region in the previous years above national average showed abilities in overcoming the process of transition. What about economic development? The chart shows the growth of the main 15 industries of Detroit metropolitan area, including 2/3 of the total of employment. The bubbled size represents the number of employees, the horizontal axis is the average income of the sector, and the vertical axis stands for the growth rate 2010 to 2011. The red dotted lines are average values of the metropolitan area of Detroit. In this time, most of the represented branches grew in employment, with the exception of credit and related activities, and transportation equipment manufacturing. Also, the growth rates of 10 branches were above the average of the whole metropolitan area. Concerning economic transition, it is also of interest how industries with higher salaries were developing. There are some growing industries of the second sector with high salaries in the Detroit metropolitan area, such as machinery or metal product manufacturing, and also professional scientific and technical services as the largest sector of the economy. The metropolitan area shows signs for successful economic transition, which could serve as a basis for the future economic development of the city of Detroit. In the last decades, many cities had to suffer from economic transition, while their metropolitan regions often performed better. The old industrial core of the cities blocked renewal, while outside the city new industrial and office spaces developed. Most of the city had and have to face those challenges. But the metropolitan area needs the metropolis. If growth and successful transformation once occur in the region, it will also affect the city. How this will look like is largely depending on the potential of the city, the location quality in relation to the contemporary needs of the market. How about this potential of the city of Detroit? As these factors are qualitative aspects of a location, the comparison with a prospering city like Zurich could give ideas what this potential of Detroit could be. The comparison with Zurich shows, beside differences such as the size and history, to name only a few, some similarities concerning transition. Both cities have a dominant main industry affecting the city's economy, which is also shaping the image of the city, the motor city Detroit, and the financial center of Zurich. Also, this main industry has been affected to global changes and politics. Global oil prices and the emerging countries were changing the market structure and demand for the Detroit car industry, while the policy changed concerning Zurich's former advantage of the bank secrecy and legal assistance in case of tax evasion. This global impacts resulted in pressure on the local economy, receiving an adaptation to the changing frame conditions. The key issue for transition of both cities is the adaptation of the main industry on these changing international frame conditions, as well as the further diversification of the local economy. Having a look at the potential of Detroit shows possible starting points. The city should benefit from its centrality, the international accessibility, and the diverse living environment in the Great Lakes region. Detroit is not only about abandoned houses. The city has a rich architecture from prospering early times of the industrialization. In combination with modern buildings, a special and unique historical cityscape developed. The city is also famous for its music culture, influencing not only the US but the whole world. Also, mobility culture is a heritage of the city, bringing up one of the main challenges on the other side. There is a need for innovation, for a new mobility culture, as well as for the image and structure of the city. One of the main challenges thereby is simply the size of the city. To conclude, the main important change Detroit needs for successful transformation and transition is to reframe. All those location qualities have to be taken into account when thinking about the potential of Detroit City and working to adapt to change by reframing the situation and the image for a positive transformation to Detroit's future. The potential is given.